Well, send the invoice to Kazem or Jafari, and they're going to reimburse him or send it my way.
Okay.
Send the invoice to Kazem or Jafari, and they're going to reimburse him or send it my way.
Okay.
As Bosch said, he had a problem to start a video.
I know his university. I'm not surprised. I used to work there too.
You mean in Munich?
Yeah. He's going to have a hard time getting someone to give him the permit at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Welcome to Scott, or welcome back. Today we are with you with Scott volume 64, which talk about poverty alleviation and recurrence paradox of rural tourism. Both topics are side by side, very important in tourism development, in concern with local communities, and one of the main concerns of the community when tourism development happens. Today's panel is very diversified, and we have people with different background, and we are eager to learn from them all. Without any ado, I'm going to invite the president of Scott, Professor Jafar Jafari, to start the webinar with the opening remark. Professor Jafar, mic is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Kazem. Welcome to the webinar. You mentioned volume 64, but on the top of that, we had many satellite webinars, which, if you count them all together, would be about 100 webinars so far, which started during the early days of COVID, and it has continued successfully. Our focus always remained on small communities, small tourism destination, entrepreneurs, small operators, and the like. When I was preparing for this webinar, I started thinking, when was the first time I heard rural tourism? To be honest with you, it was when I was doing my master's thesis many years ago, last century. There was nothing called rural tourism then. Rural tourism was a subject that was studied by leisure and recreation departments of the universities. they were championing the subject, and they would call it rural recreation or farm recreation or family recreation, village recreation, and the like. So my interpretation of the literature of the 70s was that they were thinking about the society, and the society needs to have leisure recreation. A lot of articles on fishing, fishing recreation, and the like. Later on, when tourism became popular in the United States, and that was not until end of 1960s, when Michigan State University offered the first tourism course ever in the United States. Then gradually tourism hijacked the subject from recreation, leisure recreation departments, and brought them to tourism. Excuse me, I'm not home and there's some noise around here. I don't know what has happened in this subject. I learned a lot from my good colleague, Bill Gartner, who basically told me about rural tourism when he was working with University of Minnesota and the like. And since then, it has rural tourism has become very popular in the literature and in the field of theory and practice. So I'm here to learn from you people to see how rural tourism is treated today. I don't recall in the old days there was not so much about community development via rural recreation. I thought I understood it was basically thinking about the needs of people in the area of leisure recreation. But today we have some expectations from rural tourism, and especially village tourism has now become very popular after UN tourism, the new name for UNWTO, added village tourism to its activities and recognition. Every year, as you know, UN tourism recognizes best tourism village. And we have had a couple of webinars on this Scott website series. So it's getting different shapes, different sounds, different names, but it's the same old rural tourism and rural recreation that is being populated here and elsewhere. So I'm here to learn from the panelists to see what progress has been made since 1970s in the area of leisure recreation and now rural tourism. Thank you. Kazim.
Thank you, Professor Jafar. And thank you for joining us when you are traveling. We are going to start right away without any ado. I'm going to invite the panel and the moderator, Professor Kai. As you mentioned, rural tourism is in focus of this webinar, and we have Dr. Kai today with us. Dr. Kai is professor and director of Purdue Tourism and Hospitality Research Center at Purdue University, USA. He is the author of the paper Cooperative Branding for Rural Communities and co-editor of the book series Bridging Tourism Theory and Practice series, and its first and 9th volume, Tourism Branding, Communities in Action and Quality Service and Experience in Hospitality and Tourism. Dr. Kai and his team have architected a beautiful webinar and discussion for today, and we are waiting to learn from your expertise. Dr. Kai, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Jafari, for that contextual talk. And thank you both for dedicating a session of your pioneering webinar series to today's topic on rural tourism and poverty. So we're going to focus on the linkages between rural tourism and poverty. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, regardless where you are. Welcome to today's dialogue on poverty, alleviation, and recurrence, paradox of rural tourism. My name is Chai Lipin from Purdue University, Indiana, and I'm very honored to jointly moderate this important dialogue with Professor Xiao Honggen from Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Professor Xiao will moderate the dialogue after the culture break. Now, please allow me to briefly introduce the esteemed panel of experts for today's topic. Truly, very briefly, they will or may share more about themselves during their individual talks. So on the screen, you'll see Professor Wu Zhongqiong, Emily, from the Department of Tourism, Recreation, and Leisure Studies at National Donghua University in Taiwan. Then we have Dr. Liu Xianru from the School of Economics and Management at Wuyi University in Guangdong Province. Professor Wade Gardner from the Department of Applied Economics at University of Minnesota in the state of Minnesota. And Dr. Chen Qian from the School of Culture and Tourism at Wuhan Open University in Hubei. Then Professor Thomas Bausch from the Department of Tourism at Munich University of Applied Sciences in Bavaria. Both Professor Bausch and Professor Gardner are joining us at this very moment from Europe, where the clock says 2:14 or 2:15. So let's give them and other panelists a warm round of applause. Now, before I invite our first panelist, let me provide some background, sort of setting the stage. Professor Jafari provided excellent context for the study of rural tourism, where it has come from. I'm going to give a little more information about our topic today, some kind of the background of it. And we all know that tourism in rural areas has long been celebrated as a powerful tool for alleviating poverty or even eradicating poverty. It creates jobs, stimulates local economies, and revitalizes communities. Yet, paradoxically, we often observe the recurrence of poverty in the very same regions that once benefited from tourism. So this recurrence is driven by a range of factors: environmental degradation, income inequality, dependency on tourism, and the lack of sustainable planning. So today, we will explore this paradox, understand its causes, and examine potential solutions to realize rural tourism's full promise of sustainable poverty alleviation. Now, this topic, since Professor Jafari approached me, I have looked at the topic very, very carefully, and this topic holds personal significance for myself. So I was country born and country bred in Funing County of Yancheng City in China. The background of the website of this webinar is from my birthplace, Funing County. That place has undergone remarkable transformation through rural development and witnessed a boom in rural tourism. So Funing, that's what the county is known, it was once a very quiet agricultural community suffering from poverty. I still remember my childhood days of being hungry and refusing to go to school as a protest to my parents. So today, this county, Fuling, and other rural communities in Yancheng attract visitors from near and far, across the oceans. So tourism has brought new opportunities, raised incomes, and a renewed hope for many families. However, back in my mind, I couldn't help but reflect on some challenges that might mirror the paradox we're discussing today. So as the saying goes, what carried you forward may also pull you back. So what could be done and should be done proactively to prevent such a pullback from happening in Huning and elsewhere, where tourism is both a tool for poverty alleviation and a potential source of new risks? So I hope this dialogue today will help us unpack these complexities and identify ways to ensure that rural tourism leads to long-lasting and positive change. So with that, let's delve into today's conversation on this paradox with our first panelist, Professor Wu. May I invite you to speak to our audience?
Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Chai and Professor Shaw, having me here. My name is Emily Wu, a tourism recreation leisure study professor from Taiwan. And as you can see, besides my academic researchers, I have worked closely with our government agencies, NGO associations, rural communities, and local farmers. All those focus on agritourism business and sustainable development in rural communities. Next slide, please. Next page. Yes, thank you. For today's webinar, poverty alleviation, just Professor Chai mentioned about, is one of the key issues of rural tourism development. And it also is the most apparent reasons to start up tourism in rural communities. But over the years, we do observe that rural tourism may be able to generate additional income and create jobs in the first place. But continue to ensure sustainable economic effects will be very challenging. And also, we would like the rural tourism can be able to address other sustainable goals to enhance the overall well-being of rural communities. Today, I would like to use Taiwan agritourism experience to address some of those key issues. Yes, economics is the first drive. In early 1980s, due to the decline of agricultural exports, our Ministry of Agriculture began to search for alternative economic opportunities for rural communities. And that is the starting time our government actively encouraged farmers to engage in agritourism, which we name it as a leisure farm in Taiwan. By now, we have around 397 leisure farms and 292 special agritourism spots, that is the other name, and also 104 designated leisure farm recreation area. That is, you can consider it as agritourism industrial clusters in the region. And also about 1/4 of our rural communities operate some type of community-based agritourism, and we call it as regenerative rural villages. Next page, please. Okay. For today's issue, the paradox of poverty alleviation, here I would like to make my arguments back to the fundamental courses. When we look forward to the positive outcome of agritourism development in a short time or in a long time, it truly depends on what kind of agritourism developing process we have employed. Based on Taiwan experiences, I would like to highlight 3 critical points. The first is about commercialization. To alleviate poverty means generate income and create jobs. It means commercialization is necessary, although I do understand some people doesn't really like the term. The way of commercialization will determine how much income, how many jobs, how market will respond or continue to respond to the agritourism supply. to ensure and prolong the economic effect. The Taiwan experience showed that the persisting in the core value of agriculture in the process of agritourism commercialization is very critical to make agritourism remain strong in the market. And at the same time, it also helped to avoid the drawback of commodification. Commodification means to reduce or replace inherent cultural or social value of traditional resources, and which gradually may damage the market attractiveness as well. In Taiwan, we do develop a certification system to ensure the authentic values of agritourism supply based on crop specialty of the farm. The second point I would like to make is about industrial diversification. Different types and scales of agritourism business require various investments. It is not about financial cost only. It will require many other knowledge, skills, and human resources. The greater the industrial diversification is, the higher the investment required from those farmers. And besides that, external involvement and investment would make this situation even complicated. For local farmers, the additional or sometimes unaffordable and external involvement often results in unexpected consequences. This can further discourage the long-time poverty alleviation for the rural communities. To ensure the healthy agritourism development in the rural community, a balanced agritourism supply system and workable agritourism diversification are needed, but it is really a challenging job here. The final point I would like to make is about overall local well-being. To enhance local well-being, we need to take triangular aspect of tourism impacts into account. Here, I would like to emphasize on the various aspects of those impacts cannot be considered independently. Our experience tells us that to create a reciprocal synergy among environment, economic, and social cultural effect is beneficial. It can better address multiple sustainable goals of agritourism development. There are some creative and interesting examples showing how economic benefits can be generated by agritourism commodity, which highlights its values on preserving rural environment or culture. For example, one of our farmers making their recycling economics efforts as part of their sustainable tourism package and well received by the market. I think I used up my time. Let's hand the microphone back to Professor Chai.
Thank you, Professor Wu. Dr. Liu, are you ready? May I invite you to speak to our audience?
Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Professor Chai. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Professor Chai and Professor Xiao for having me on this webinar. I will be sharing findings from our 5-year ethnographic study, and this study begins in 2017. Next page, please. Thank you. Our research was conducted in Shuiji village in southern China, and this village has rich tourism resources, and it features a World Natural Heritage Site, a World Geopark, and a National Geopark. This village is quite small, with only around 100 households. The population is around 570 villagers. Tourism in Shaiji begins in 1980s. Since then, tourism has become the backbone of the village economy. Most households are actively involved in tourism. Some run restaurants and homestays. Others work for tourism enterprise. Many invest in collective tourism ventures. Through 4 decades, tourism make the Shaiji transformed from poverty to prosperity. The village serves as the prime example for how tourism can reduce poverty in China. But in recent years, the village has been facing several critical challenges. Next slide, please. First, we are seeing an increasing issue with uneven income distribution. It creates social stratification. We found that there are 2 centers within the community. One is tourist center. The other one is the social hub occupied by elite group. They control resources allocation, manage collective economy operation, control the information transfer, and lead community planning. People inside or near the social hub are connected by different interests, such as commerce, social relations, values, or political relations. These 2 centers directly affect villagers' ability to participate in and benefit from tourism. Especially, villagers living farther from the tourism center participate more passively. Socially, distance from the social hub means less participation and fewer benefits. Take the family who started the first tourism economy in Shaiji, for example. They have accumulated significant economic and social capital over the years. This family has become the major player in the village economy. They hold substantial shares in many industries and businesses. During our field work, we also observe a concerning trend. Few young people born after 1980 still live in the village. The reason is straightforward. Salary. Tourism-related jobs are available in the village actually, but the income is much lower than city wages, and there is limited room for career development. The second major challenge relates to economic vulnerabilities. Villagers originally lived by fishing and farming. Now over 80% of household works in tourism-related jobs. This heavy dependence on tourism makes the village extremely vulnerable. They are easily affected by external factors like government policy changes, pandemic a few years ago, and market fluctuations. In fact, during our visit in October this year, I learned that many former restaurant and souvenir shops operators have seek jobs in the other place. This was due to the declining domestic tourism demand. Third, there are significant governance issues. The village has created high barriers for external investments. These barriers were initially created to protect the local interests. For example, the government has purposely helped villagers run the lake cruise business without competitions from outside. But it has limited innovation and upgrading of tourism products. The collective enterprise can successfully pool resources locally, but they lack long-term planning and professional management. Finally, where absolute poverty has been eliminated, we are seeing the emergence of relative poverty. Aging is another pressing issue. as I mentioned earlier, young people see limited opportunities for personal growth in the village. The village is becoming hollow. So to conclude, this case shows that tourism is an effective tool for poverty alleviation in different dimensions, of course. But maintaining a village's sustainable development is far more complex and involves deeper underlying issues. The paradox is that prosperity itself can breed new forms of poverty or relative poverty. That's all I'm going to share for now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. Professor Gardner,
Thank you, Liping.
I invite you to speak to the audience.
Okay, thank you, Liping. Greetings from Zagreb, Croatia, not a rural area for sure. One correction to my title. It is now emeritus professor because I retired from the University of Minnesota last year. And that's just a fancy way of saying that I get to keep my university email. So that's where we're at right now. Let me talk about poverty alleviation in terms of the development model that is used. We have a number of development models that I will go over, a few of them, and talk about some of the benefits and some of the disadvantages. First one I'd like to talk about is the isolated enclave development. These are private developments that are found in rural areas, but they are self-contained. They are not fully integrated into the rural economy. Their main benefit is employment. That's in fact their primary benefit, which they use to try and get support, government support for these types of developments. The success depends on employing rural workers into the tourism economy. However, this is not as easy as it sounds because many of them do not have the necessary skills required to move from something like agriculture into tourism, working with people. So that is an issue that needs to be resolved if we're going to increase full integration in tourism into a rural economy. I'll give you a couple of examples. Now, I used to spend a lot of time in Macau, and on the weekends, I would escape the crowded areas of Macau and travel to a hot springs area outside of Zhuhai in mainland China. And you buy a package, includes transportation to the development, transportation back to Zhuhai, and everything on site. So there was actually no integration into the rural economy. There were some people from the area that were employed in the hot springs, but not that many because they did not have the skills. So we're simply using the rural area to put this attraction in. Another example is the Westin Hotel in Maui in Hawaiian Islands. You can fly into the airport and take a private road to the resort. You never set foot in the other communities on the island. Everything is contained at the resort, and when you leave, you take the private road back to the airport. So they provide some benefits to the rural areas, but they are not fully integrated and don't provide as many benefits as they could. Now, I'll give you one other example. This is Morgan's Rock in Nicaragua. It's a high-end ecotourism resort. They employ only local people, and they train them. They use only local food, and all material used to construct the resort is from the local area. One of the deficiencies is that the food, although local, is grown on the farm that is owned by the owners of the resort. So they're not developing the value chain with other rural areas. Another development model that we often see that is touted as rural tourism is the preservation of public resources, i.e. national parks. The arguments for that include protection of unique resources for now and the future, and this fits the definition of sustainability. You get long-term returns from tourism, but some of the negative issues are that most of these national parks are operated under a concessionaire arrangement, with the concessionaire being a large corporation not headquartered in the rural area. So a lot of the profits then go out of the rural area back to the corporate headquarters. It's also an issue with employment, a lot of seasonal employment. So you end up with employing For example, students. What do they do with their money? They take it back to where they go to school to help them with their annual expenses. So these are some issues that do not provide the full benefit of that attraction to rural areas. Now, one of the arguments against national parks is we need these resources that they lock up and protect, such as timber, minerals, hydroelectric development, for other forms of development not related to rural areas necessarily. Now, I discount this issue as by opening up those areas for this exploitation of these resources, you achieve high short-term returns versus the lower long-term returns from tourism. Tourism will always be there if you have a national park, but a forest won't if you allow its exploitation. And so you encounter these leakage issues constantly with rural tourism development. So how do we counter some of these arguments? Well, we integrate this development more fully into the rural area. For example, I did some work in Zambia, Kafue National Park. It's a wilderness park. It has some safari camps there, which are high-end, fairly expensive, and they do employ local people. They employ them for guides, for cooks, for maintenance, and so on. But the problem is, where do they get their food from? They actually get their food from suppliers in Lusaka, the capital city, which is 2 hours away from the park. But yet in Lusaka, you'll see hawkers on the streets selling bush tomatoes, which are coming from areas close to the national park. Bush tomatoes supposedly being better tomatoes. Why doesn't the safari camp buy locally? Because there is no value chain created. They need to have those food resources provided in a timely and dependable manner. And if there's no organization that can do that, they will go to the suppliers in the capital city, and then that money again leaves the rural area and goes to the urban area. Another issue, another type of development model that causes some issues is the transient visitor versus the long-term residential type of development, i.e. seasonal homes. Many Central American countries cater to the retired Americans who are coming down there to buy second homes. Costa Rica, Belize, Panama are at the top of the list. Now, the positive is you have high levels of employment, and you also have development of the value chain. Once you have a seasonal home, people are actually going to have to buy stuff locally because they live there for an extended period of time. The negative outcome, however, is the increase in land prices due to the expat purchases of these seasonal homes. They're driving up prices for local people. Local people might be better off in terms of their incomes, but they become they enter into the land poverty issue when they don't have enough money to even afford the land to build their own home. So these are some of the issues that we have. How do we deal with them? Well, if we want to achieve sustainable development, we have to focus on local employment, and we might have to provide in-house educational programs to build the necessary skill levels. For example, going back to Morgan's Rock in Nicaragua, I happened to travel there right after it opened, and the general manager was a Canadian. She was training her replacement, a Nicaraguan. The owners of this resort said all employees, including upper management, have to be from Nicaragua, and they worked to achieve that. The other thing that we can do is to develop value chains. This might also require public programs to assist in getting this done. Many local people do not have the organizational ability to consolidate all the farms, bring the food in, and transport it in the dependable and timely manner that some of the attractions might need. The third issue is the affordable land pricing. And this is the most difficult one to achieve, especially in an economy where land prices are totally market driven. So what do? Analyze the development model in place, identify issues that may contribute to poverty, enact policy prescriptions such as economic incentive programs to deal with the negative economic externalities. Solutions must fully engage private and public sectors in a complementary way to deal with these issues of rural poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Gardner. Dr. Chen, are you ready? I invite you to speak to our audience.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Tsai. And today I'm going to share my multi-year research and investigation and some main findings and potential solutions here. And it's about a mechanism for preventing poverty recurrence at rural tourism destinations. So next slide, please. Okay, so many people now worry about the sustainability of the positive effects of rural tourism, especially the governments and the residents. They worry about that whether the areas that have elevated poverty through rural tourism will fall back into poverty. So preventive measures may be effective, but only be effective before a poverty recurrence happens by proactively identifying the risk and the weak links and points to intervene. It requires a flexible and practical mechanism. Residents' perceptions and behaviors, such as their responses to policies, may serve as key signals. So we conducted a 6-year longitudinal study in a remote Pingqian village in Hubei province of China. Before 2012, the villagers were stuck in extreme poverty. But after 10 years of developing rural tourism, they not only escaped poverty, but also saw their average household income reach twice the national average for that year. And our research revealed that rural tourism empowered the villagers to improve their physical and financial capital by reducing dependence on cropland. So before 2012, they lived in the adobe house, just as the pictures show. And after over 10 years developing rural tourism, now they lived in the modern brick house, and each family owned at least one car. So villagers are sensitive to the tourism development, especially when they consider it the only pillar industry. Now, let's see the next slide, please. When asked about their perceptions of the risk of poverty recurrence, their responses vary. Some residents believe it is likely to happen, where others do not. Based on the villagers' perceptions, we categorize them into the high risk and the low risk perceptions groups. From the 6-year research, we developed a mechanism that not only illustrates the relationship, but also identifies the potential solutions. The interactive vulnerabilities can significantly impact their risk perception of poverty recurrence, thus shaping their behaviors in investment decisions and business operations in rural tourism. Households with different risk perceptions showed variations in their self-fulfilling prophecy loop and its interactions with vulnerabilities and livelihood assets. In this mechanism, for villagers with high risk perceptions, policy can play a role in preventing poverty recurrence. The one-time or short-term policies, such as the ecological relocation subsidies, may provide temporary income boosts, but lack sustainability. It is also crucial to create more jobs for them. The policy adjustments should align with changes in villagers' life aspirations, and developing diversified tourism products to address the seasonality and helping local residents establish professional organizations to strengthen their social capital are also important strategies to enhance their resilience to risk. These are aspects that collaborative governance may address. And it's also worth noting that the issue of industrial monoculture increases the risk for the development of industries and rural revitalization in tourism-driven poverty elevation areas. Currently, the main industries in these regions are combining agriculture with the service sector. This kind of structure provides job opportunities and even attracts some outside workers. But the face-to-face, this kind of consumption models of products and services are highly vulnerable to the pandemics or natural disasters. So there is intense homogeneity in the tourism industries across different poverty elevation regions. Therefore, with low risk perception, this kind of group, they still harbor underlying concerns about falling back into poverty. From this mechanism, we can see that strengthening villagers' ability to withstand external risk and balancing their livelihood capital structure are equally important. These are linked to the industrial structure itself, as both directly influence their beliefs and behaviors. So creating tourism industry clusters centered around culture and developing regionally distinctive cultural tourism products can enhance local residents' cultural confidence and cohesion. And by using big data networks to form complementary regional alliances, it can also foster differentiated competition. That's all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Professor Bausch, may I invite you to speak to our audience? You are muted. We couldn't hear you. Hira, can you?
Yes,
Yeah.
no. I hope fine now. I hope so.
Okay.
Yeah. Greetings from Munich, near to the Alpine area, where I had been working now since more than 30 years. So I will have a look back to this rural area, or originally a rural area, and think a little bit about what can we learn from the Alpine area. The tourism in the Alpine area is something which developed more than 150 years ago, and the boost of this tourism development had been first the construction of the railway lines, the railway connections from the big cities, growing cities like Vienna, Munich, Zurich, Lyon, Torino, Milan, around the Alpine area. So these train lines, they allowed the novelty and a growing upper mid-class to travel. But this was a very small part of society. It was a very exclusive small part traveling. And the main reason of this part had been, on the one side, of course, also recreation and socializing, but it had mainly also health reasons. The cities were, because of the industrialization, very dirty, and there we had the tuberculosis and cholera, especially in summertime. It was very risky to stay in the cities. So maybe then the people moved out, the rich people who had the money, they moved out into the mountains to disappear out of these risk areas. So this was the first phase, and the rural population, they began taking on jobs in tourism, but these were mostly simple support roles, as the population itself was generally not involved in the investment. Instead, they could generate some additional income through small jobs, but also then by selling products from their farm. This development was also limited to regions directly connected to the railway lines. So as a result, places like St. Moritz or Davos in Switzerland became internationally well known. The German author and Nobel Prize winner Thomas Mann, he described this in his book, The Magic Mountain. So there we can see a little bit, it was not the mass tourism as we can know it today. The next major development found then after World War I, emerging social standards, such a few vacation days per year, allowed parts of the lower mid class to travel. This brought new social forms of tourism, particularly in nature's experiences and sports. Winter sports became a socially accepted activity, and the first mountain railways and also cable cars were built. But the really boom of tourism in the rural areas in the alpine space then, or alpine area, started after World War II. That the reason was there that people now could travel by car. And the car then also opened the possibilities for tourism development in remote tourism areas without a train connection. So, and this changed then also the role of the rural population. The farmers themselves became hosts. So they're small, modest farms. They rented out rooms, often their own bedrooms to guests in the summertime. And with the income from renting rooms and selling agricultural products, they expanded their houses step by step. So we see today some properties where 40, 50 years ago, it was a small farm, and today it's a 4 or 5 stars hotel with 100 or 200 beds, but not larger. It's still very frequently family business, and it's also generic development, organic development, locally driven by locally growth. And therefore, we see something which had not to do with industrial investment. These industrial investments on the large scale, they came up then in the 70s and 80s in some areas of France and Italy, where really then in remote areas, investors came and built a large ski resorts and large hotels. But this is more or less really something which has not to do with the development for rural population. So what are the key takeaways of this historic development? One key takeaway is that the accessibility is the central success factor. Without accessibility, we do not need to start tourism business. The second is the involvement of the local population. This allows them to benefit from prosperity generated by tourism. And this includes also then that there is education, capacity building of the locals, starting as farmers first, but then entering into a professional position in the business, in the tourism business. And finally, also very important is that the money is not flowing out of the destination, that there is a reinvestment by the local population in a continual improvement of infrastructure, which is essential to be competitive and to offer also on the long term competitive new services or to improve the existing services. Now, a short look at the current situation, and we talk here about poverty, and so the question is there still poverty in the Alpine region today after 150 years of tourism? And of course, we cannot use the definition of the United Nations. Concerning poverty, the United Nations definition of poverty is $1.25 per day income, which is in Europe, in the Alpine area, something you cannot live from. So we have a statistical definition of poverty, and this statistical definition of poverty is that people having a net household income below of 60% of the median household income are defined as to be endangered of poverty. And there's always people having this endangering of poverty, because of course also this statistical definition, because if the income of the people is increasing of everybody 10%, it's still a share having the situation to be poor in the sense of statistical definition. But nevertheless, this is really also a current issue. It's a real existing poverty. There are a new part of the rural society, but also of the immigrants who came to these regions to work also in the tourism, which are endangered by poverty. And the reason are two. The first reason is that we have extreme high living costs for the daily necessities and the public services, because the money flowing into the destinations by the tourists increase steadily the prices. And the second is the real estate market and extremely high housing costs. And these two problems, they have been increasingly increasing steadily over the last 10 years. The debates we have currently about over-tourism and also the need for degrowth in tourism in the Alpine area are more and more extensive, and we do currently not see solutions for that. The result is the shortage of workforce in tourism, and by this, a kind of a natural end of growth, maybe. In the Butler tourism area life cycle, we could say that we reached a critical level of growth and do not have a strategy to overcome these problems. When tourism creates poverty, it will lose the society support and the attractiveness of the destinations will decrease. We need new strategies for payments covering the cost of living in combination with good living standards, social services in the new rural population. So, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bausch, and thank you to all our panelists for your enlightening talks. I have had the pleasure of learning from them for many years. And I'm constantly inspired, impressed with their professional endeavors that serve the small rural communities as long as 30+ years. So I do have several questions which are likely on the minds of our audience. We will defer these questions to the second half when Professor Xiao will moderate further discussions and the Q&As. Please join me in thanking our panelists. And we're going to have a culture break, right?
Yes, Professor Kai, thank you very much. Wonderful presentations and a lot of insight. So we are going to watch the video and come back with the second half of the panel. Admin.
Taining County, located in the northwest of Fujian Province, is a hidden gem known for its rich cultural heritage and natural beauty. Today, we are exploring Sheiji Village in Taining. This small community, nestled beside the sparkling Dajing Lake, has an incredible story of a transformation through tourism to share. Back in the day, Sheiji was a typical agricultural village in China. Its residents lead a simple, self-sufficient life by growing rice, soybeans, and rapeseed. But in 1979, the government built a large dam and relocated the entire village. As a result, the villagers lost their farmland and livelihood. Times became incredibly tough, with no electricity, no running water, and barely any roads. Fortunately, the dam created a beautiful lake, Dajing Lake. Villagers began fishing using homemade bamboo raft and boats. In the early 1980s, some clever villagers started giving boat rides to visitors. This simple act marked the beginning of Sheiji's tourism industry. As word spread about the lake's beauty, more visitors started arriving. Villagers quickly embraced the tourism business. Beyond boat rides, they opened restaurants, souvenir shops, and even built some attractions. In the 1990s, tourism really took off. The village established its first cruise company. This is the huge leap from the simple boat rides of the past. With some help from the government, they were building fancy two-story houses, living downstairs and hosting guests upstairs. As the 21st century began, Sheiji's tourism industry flourished. The village formed Fisheries Association, Cruise Association, and B&B Association to explore innovative community development models. Through concerted efforts, Dajing Lake was designated a UNESCO World Natural Heritage Site and a World Geopark. Today, it attracts a growing number of domestic and international tourists. The villagers' income has significantly increased and diversified, including dividends from collective enterprise, operating income, and welfare benefits from the village collective. Where Sheiji has successfully achieved poverty alleviation through tourism, it now faces new challenges: ensuring sustainable development, retaining young people, and reducing the gap between advantaged and disadvantaged groups are now key priorities. Clearly, Sheiji's inspiring journey is far from over. The people here are still working hard to make their village even better. So, let's look forward to the changes the next 40 years will bring to Sheiji, this hidden gem in southern China.
Great. Back
Thank
to you, Dr. Chen and your team. So we are ready to start the second panel.
Thank you, Kazan. Thank you, everybody, for being with this panel. I know it's a Sunday morning in my place, Hong Kong, and weekend certainly in most parts of the world. I wish to also echo my thanks for the great knowledge sharing brought to us on this topic by the great panelists. We have heard a lot from my experience, or maybe from most of our experience of traveling or researching. We may see that rural tourism has been an important means of tourism development in different parts of the world. However, we also see that rural tourism takes different forms and follows different models of development. As we just shared from the panel, or as we just heard from the panel, that rural tourism faces as many challenges or issues as well as prospects or hopes. Many of the issues that we have just heard about, for example, examples from Taiwan on commercialization, industrial diversification, local well-being, as well as two cases from China, mainland China, social stratification, economic vulnerability, governance, sustainability concerns. How to make rural tourism development following a mode of sustainable, to ensure sustainability. And there are many ways to understand what we meant by sustainability. And Professor Garner brought us many examples from different parts of the world, touching upon many. What I see as very pressing is the rural tourism as a self-contained development with low skills, even though it creates local job or local employment, but the level of entry is relatively lower. And unlike urban economy or unlike global economy, it's not readily integrated as part of it. So we have many issues like this. And Professor Bosch calls for new strategies to ensure future development of rural tourism, and in particular, to make sure that rural tourism development can eventually lead to poverty alleviation, or can be a way to prevent poverty from coming back to that rural community. In this part, I wish to first invite the panelists, because due to the time constraint, we don't have enough time for everybody to fully elaborate the thought. I wish to invite the panelists to see whether there are any pressing additional comments that you wish to still make. Due to time, you can't make it. If there are any pressing issues, very additional comments that you want to make, including even Kazan and Jafar, after hearing all this talk, will there be any additional pressing issues or additional comments you want to make on this topic?
If I may, I have a general question, maybe to just warm up the panel.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I have a question about the concept of poverty. I saw from different angles, poverty was explained, and how people, and the main focus, or a main focus, was on generating income and dealing with economic capital. I saw in Dr. Chen's presentation that we have more than economic capital, like social capital, human capital, natural capital, and so on. For example, in Japan, in rural, if we think about poverty alleviation, not much focus as in economic capital, because infrastructure good, people have their own pension money and so on, but aging society, old population, and so on. So rural tourism for rural Japan is to introduce new population or younger population, to encourage them to move in. It's not about income generation. And in other countries may be different. So my question to the panel, to all our panelists, is that how you define poverty for different rural destinations.
Anybody from the panel? What do we mean by poverty in rural tourism development?
I think the mics are off. Yes, Bill.
Yeah, okay. I've just unmuted my mic, and I would say, I mean, Thomas gave us the definition that's used by, I think, the World Bank. You must make more than X amount per day. But poverty, I think, is the inability to take care of your family. And that means put food on the table, have a place to stay, the basic necessary requirements for having a decent life. If you don't have those, then you are in poverty.
Okay, any other thoughts on what we mean by poverty in rural tourism development? How can tourism
I would like to add also possibility, the ability to take part in social and cultural life of place. So it's not only about having food and the roof. It's also about really being able to be integrated in the social life at a certain place, and by this also then on the long term to stay at a place and not to be pushed out.
Yeah, the situation in Taiwan for the rural tourism and the rural communities, we have the similar situation with Japan. Like we want to have the revitalization of the rural community by inviting more young people coming back to the rural communities, and I think that the issues we encounter is that for those young generation coming back to the rural villages, and most likely they will need the job and make the living there. And the agritourism or rural tourism may be one of the opportunities for them. And that is the places also that by their involvement, some of the creativity and innovation of agritourism business can be produced or can be generated. However, how can we help them to really rooted back to the rural community will be a very key problem, because they need to make enough incomes and have a family there. So that is some places the government agencies and policy try to help them. And that is the situation in Taiwan.
It's interesting. Yeah, I have heard, I visited Japan a couple of months ago, hearing colleagues there speaking on rural tourism development as a strategy of relocating population. There are too much population density too high in city area, and then tourism development in rural area become a way of attracting people to develop business or do entrepreneurship in the rural area. And we also hear from Emily that the situation is very much close to, as rural tourism development as a livelihood, as a lifestyle. And certainly there are different ways to look at the future of rural tourism. And my understanding of rural tourism in much part of the Asia may still be maximizing benefit or optimizing income distribution from tourism. I mean, tourism generates some benefit, but how to maximize it for the broader community and how to optimize the distribution. Business certainly make profit, and but how can such development ensure that the broader community, I mean, more stakeholders to get benefit from tourism? Any thoughts on that? Ways to maximize benefit or to optimize income distribution?
If I may join the conversation, it seems we are basically looking at rural tourism, agritourism from economic generation point of view. Jobs are generated, food is placed on the table, the family have a roof over their head, and the like. I didn't hear enough of concentrating on the host and the host culture and the sensitivity of the host culture, the simplicity of the host culture that would be threatened by tourism. Money might be coming, jobs might be generated, but the cultures are very fragile. And we often, when we tourism people are talking, we assume more tourists coming to this territory, more jobs are generated. True. We try to supply local food so the money is kept in the community. All of that is true. But how about the happiness, well-being of the host community? They may have food and housing, but are they happy the way they used to be? I think we should be thinking about that as well, rather than emphasizing always money and job generation. The quality of life that tourism would give to them. Jobs they have, but how about the quality? How happy are they with themselves? In tourism, we talk about over-tourism. In the field of tourism, we talk about over-tourism, and we always think over-tourism has to do with Barcelona, Mallorca, Dubrovnik, and the like. Well, there would be over-tourism in small communities as well, in village tourism as well. A village with 100 people can tolerate so few tourists. So I think these are some of the issues that we should consider in respect to rural community, rather than paying closer attention to job generation and import substitution.
Thank you for your rejoinder, Jafar. I saw a couple of questions were raised in the chat box. So one question comes from one of the audience named Zheng Yan Qu. And the question is, we have discussed many issues or we have identified many challenges in rural tourism development. The question goes like this: how do we identify such challenges? How do we identify these issues? Do we identify these issues or challenges by questionnaire or by interviews? It sounds like a PhD student's question. Any thoughts from the panelists? How do you identify your questions in your case study?
May I say something?
Yes, please.
Of course, interview is an effective way to get the data. And of course, we involve some direct observations, participate observations, surveys, household surveys. And of course, we analyze some secondary data, like official document, official reports, government statistics, archives, etc. So it is a mixed methods, combining multiple methods to get the data and analyze the data.
Very good thought. Maybe we move to the next question on the chat box. And this question, yes.
May I say something about what
please.
Jafar brought up?
Yeah, please go ahead.
How we evaluate happiness, and I look at Bhutan. You know, the happiness, gross happiness quotient instead of gross domestic product or whatever. Who's to say if I'm happy or not? Who determines overall happiness for an area based on the level of tourism? Somebody's making these decisions and saying everybody's happy because we have fewer tourists here or we have more income here. So these are questions that really can't be answered on a large scale basis. They must be drilled down to the individual or family basis. And there's going to be people who are happy about what's going on because maybe they're directly involved in the tourism sector. And there's going to be people that are really upset with it because maybe some of their areas which they're used to just having to themselves are now having to be shared, and they're going to be sort of unhappy about that. So I don't know if that question can really be answered. I know there are a number of studies out there that look at social well-being, and there are ways to quantify those, but true happiness is not something that can ever be measured.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, subjective well-being or happiness could be something entirely up to the person who actually, or up to the whole village, or even who actually experienced the period of development. It reminds me of...
May I add something there?
Yes,
we just did a study for South Tyrol with 500,000 inhabitants, and there we did a study in tourism, very tourism expensive regions and low tourism regions, and we did not see any significant impact of the level of tourism, the tourism intensity, of the happiness of the population. So the question in general is there a difference between tourism as the key economy to other economies, creating finally the happiness or supporting the happiness of the population? So maybe we should have more general focus on what is the economic system and the society system at a certain place, and what is then finally also the impact of the system on happiness of the people.
Wonderful. Let's go on to the next question. I'm sure we have a lot more to say about being happy or subjective well-being. And some villages may be just being happy with poor, if we can put poverty in quotation marks. It reminds me of a wonderful poetry long ago in Chinese history of a village we call Tao Hua Yuan Ji, and that village was lost because nobody can access it, because simply there's no access to that village, and people in that village live very happily. And then one day, one poet found a way to enter that village, and that poet brought something new to that village. And the poet found out that village has been lost for many, many centuries. And they found all people in the village are living in a very happy lifestyle, and because there's no comparison with outside village, with outside world. Anyway, it's an interesting discussion. We have a question here about absolute poverty coming from an audience called Yukio Yotsumoto. And looking at the name, it must be someone from Japan. And the question is there any destination where absolute poverty has been alleviated? We talk about tourism being helpful in, in alleviating some poverty, different level of poverty. Is there any instance or cases or examples where absolute poverty was alleviated, but later absolute poverty increased as a result of continuous rural tourism development? I didn't read the whole question. It's a long comment. It's on the chat box. Any thoughts on that?
Let me jump in here very quickly. I think both cases presented by Dr. Liu, Dr. Chen were pertaining to absolute poverty. Lots of rural tourism development as a contributor to the rural development is getting people out of extreme poverty or absolute poverty. The same inquiry, the same person asked the question, raised the excellent point. Are we moving from absolute or the extreme poverty to relative poverty? Maybe returning to poverty or recurrence poverty only limited to relative poverty instead of the former absolute poverty. So I think that's an excellent point the person who asked the question raised. So I would say most of the cases, I couldn't pinpoint percentage of it. Most cases where rural tourism play a role in alleviating poverty is absolute extreme poverty. And I think many local authorities in China are very worried that such investment in getting people out of poverty, they may go back to absolute poverty. So this goes back to the question that Kaisam asked, what is poverty? I think it's localized relative to the region, to the country. I think many countries have their benchmark, for a certain stage of it. And in Alps, Dr. Bosch example, that's one case. Then in the two villages that Dr. Liu and Dr. Chen pointed out, that's another standard case where they follow the national standard of what qualifies to be poverty.
If I may add something here, you're looking for an actual example where absolute poverty was eradicated through tourism, but is now slipped back into absolute poverty. I would offer the example of the Salton Sea area in Southern California. Salton Sea was formed by a breach in irrigation canal. It's a low area below sea level. It filled up. It became a major recreation area for Californians, water skiing, platted for seasonal home development, and then 2 years of successive rain raised the level, wiped out all the development that had taken place along the shoreline. It was abandoned by tourists. It was abandoned by tourism development. It slipped back into absolute poverty. And now it is talking about lithium production to get itself back out of this poverty. So maybe it's not poverty that led to, or maybe it's not tourism that led to the slippage back into absolute poverty. It was natural conditions, but there are examples of where that has happened. If tourism was the only horse to be ridden there and that horse ran away, it's no longer a place where you can have economic development.
Good. One more question in the chat box from my colleague Dori. The question is directed to Dr. Liu. Is there any initiative led by the government or NGO to bring awareness to the locals, especially the youth, about the benefits of tourism to their home villages and how it has transformed their life? What do you think? I suppose she's saying, what do you think? What do I and what do Professor Chai think about place attachment of the locals to where they were born, to encourage them to contribute, not just to expect a highly paid job. The question seems to be directed to Dr. Liu and Professor Chai and myself, maybe. You want to take a lead? Anyone? The government, I'm more familiar with rural tourism development in mainland China, so I may speak on behalf of that because I've been working mainly in Hong Kong, so from the media, from various kinds of sources, I understand rural revitalization or rural community development or beautifying China, especially the rural area. It has been a national development strategy from the government standpoint, and there are many different initiatives taken. Rural development or rural development through tourism has been happening over the past few decades. And we now seem to fear that the eastern part of China, if you talk about rural tourism, it's more, it's more entertaining the needs of urban consumers. Urban consumers going to the suburban area, to have fun, recreational, maybe more domestic tourism type of thing. And west or Midwest part, poverty alleviation may be more common in that area. I'm speaking very broadly of geography, but Dr. Liu's study is still in southeast coast of China, Fujian province. And there are also development in northwest part of China where rural development is more resource driven. For example, they say the ice related skiing or skating related winter tourism, slow tourism type of thing. So I think the governance has been a very essential issue, I should say, because such tourism activity have to happen at a very, very elementary level, very, very basic level in the village. And then there are various kinds of stakeholders involved. For example, the village leader. Dr. Liu must be familiar doing your study in that village. There are various kinds of stakeholders, external business people, and then young people coming back to the home village. Some example that Professor Wu mentioned. A bit similar also in China, because China's development has been undergoing this many years. And there are people who were initially born in that village and make some money, make a fortune from working in the urban area, and then want to come back to the rural area, to their home place, to do business. And the first choice is often tourism. So there were different kinds of stakeholders like these and rural villagers who are less involved, or some are totally not involved in tourism at all, but how can they get benefit? So there are governance of all these different stakeholders. I believe it's a very complicated issue, and it's a huge topic where hundreds of doctoral studies can work on. I think it would be good to have more, research or papers on these. That's my thought, quick thought. Dr. Liu or Professor Chai?
Something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I
You
think
can
for
respond. You can respond to the question. You can respond to the question, or just anything in this line of discussion would be fine.
Okay. For successful rural tourism development, I believe the government plays a crucial role in this process. And for a successful case, I think the government should manage 4 key relationships. The first one, the government should properly handle the relationship with the market. Is it the government lead or the market lead development? And secondly, the government needs to have an appropriate relationship with the private enterprise. And Third, the government should maintain a sound or good relationship with the residents, especially those disadvantaged residents. Pay attention to those disadvantaged group. Lastly, the government should manage the relationship with the village and external environment. This means that the government should focus on tasks that the village cannot accomplish on its own, such as attracting external investment or promoting the village externally, like just like Professor Chai's papers mentioned, the collective branding for rural tourism village. That's what I think for the question.
But
Thank you.
let me just add to that. I think my time is up very quickly. I want to go back to Dr. Gardner's point. Two potential solutions is a broad, big solutions. One is education, the other integration. The local talents must be educated in order to be retained or attracted back, number one. Number two, tourism cannot be a one economic activity separated from other life in the rural community. So the quality of life issue. So to our organizers, Professor Jafari and Kazim, here is another topic for you to do, right? So rural tourism and place attachment of locals. This is just a suggestion to you.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on the time. I think we are running not late, but we're just running up to the time frame. Could I also just follow the very traditional formula of concluding this? No, maybe just turning it to somebody else to conclude, but to close the discussion. Could I just suggest that we envision what rural tourism's future will be? I understand we are in different parts of the world, and rural tourism development in different parts of the world take different forms. Can we have a kind of envisioning? It's very paradoxical, forward-looking, but it's very, very reflexive. Reflection says something about what has happened in the past, but somehow we are forward-looking. So can we envision what the future will be for rural tourism in your parts of the world, in Taiwan, in Japan, in your study village, Dr. Chen and Dr. Niu? Very quick one, very quick envisioning that you wish to share. Very quick one. You can, anybody can start. Dr. Wu, maybe, Professor.
It's a very big questions and good questions. I'm thinking the agritourism should tie very close to the core value of agriculture and the basic values of the rural communities. I think that would remain like the co-competitiveness, and because the rural communities would be in different stages of the development, but the core value of the agriculture should be held in terms of make the market competitiveness, and also all those like well-being and happiness and sustainability all ties to that. That is the way I'm thinking.
Dr. Chen? Any thoughts on based on this your study in the village, for example, what do you think the future should be or could be?
In the future, the village that I studied for many years, maybe in the future they have to integrate and develop their own local culture to the other cultures, because they face the development that many tourists come to their village. So they have to balance their local culture and other cultures and improve their quality of life. So this also the problem they face now. Yeah.
Professor Gardner, you have been to different parts of the world, and you are familiar with many cases in different parts of the world. what would you see the future will be, or what's your ideal? I mean, the type of ideal rural tourism that you see, appropriate into a place.
This is a very difficult question to address because the future is going to be whatever the people want it to be. You can look back at history. Las Vegas was once a backwater. And what has it become now? It was once rural. It's not rural anymore. Macau was a seedy backwater. Look what it's become now. So it's going to depend on policy prescriptions. It's going to depend on what local people that get engaged want to see happen. It's going to depend on outside interests who want to invest and their influence. So it's not a question that can be addressed head on. It's a question that can only be addressed when the issue presents itself.
Thank you. Any additional thoughts, Professor Bausch?
Maybe one point is that also we should all be careful to think that any rural place on the world is finally qualified for tourism development. On any level of the development, finally the question is always, is there something really on the long term attracting people to come there? And are there competitors being more competitive, more attractive nearby? So frequently policymakers are thinking that if they do not have any other idea how to develop a region, they say we do tourism. But we have to be very careful to promise to the locals that tourism is always a solution. I think there are many regions on the world where tourism really will not be the solution.
In my view, my dream rural tourism future will be the modern version of Taohuayuan. I know it's very difficult to communicate this idea to my English-speaking colleague, but those who are familiar with the Taohuayuan will be my modern version, though, of Taohuayuan will be the future of rural tourism. Can I pass, or Jafar or Kazam, do you have any additional comments to make on these closing questions? Envisioning, future-looking, forward-looking.
Thank you very much. Actually, the topic is very wide and very important and sensitive, so I don't dare to conclude. I give this job to Jafar, but I just have a few points that I learned from the discussion. I want to point it back. The first that I want to emphasize is that the way you presented clearly stand that rural and urban, they have different property. They have different wealth. So to make rural more rich, to help them to overcome the poverty issues, we have to see what are they rich at and what are they poor at. So if tourism is going to be an option, definitely is not going to replace their livelihood. Farmers are not going to be tourism entrepreneurs, for example, and they stop farming, but tourism is going to be a complementary, a livelihood supplement to enhance their culture, to be more happier, healthier, and wealthier on what they have and what they are as a rural community. And again, focusing on rural, I think rural communities, because they are smaller than urban, they have the more in rural and isolated place, the more community wealth and the more cultural association of the community, that tourism should value this, should bring it up, should create the sense of the place, and as you mentioned, the place attachment. The very last question in the chat I saw from Dr. Davari was that is there any governmental or public sector or NGO effort on this? I say yes. I am personally involved in two initiatives, one with a United Nations World Food and Agriculture Organization, that they have a program of globally important agricultural heritage. They designate agricultural heritage communities, traditional agriculture, livelihood, and it has a tourism program that I have been collaborating with. And recently, UN Tourism, they have the Best Tourism Village initiative that they designate best tourism villages in the world. Over 150 villages are designated, and they are, I think, they created a good database on how rural communities have been successfully utilize tourism as a tool to overcome poverty and to become rich. But yes, I think we have to continue this discussion with rural tourism and place attachment, and make sure that communities revitalize, or communities develop in a way that they want, and they have control on their own development process. So before I go more further, I would like to ask Jafar to do the difficult job of conclusion. Jafar, floor is yours.
Well, yes, you did say difficult job. This was a very interesting webinar, very challenging in many ways. Many topics were introduced, and when at the beginning I said I know rural tourism through the literature of rural recreation, leisure recreation. And I was wondering myself, sitting here, if the background of every panelist was leisure recreation, not tourism, how we would have discussed this subject. And I can now have my own questions rather than answers. And the first basic question that comes to my mind is rural tourism for any area, or should be selective? Is this a suitable solution for rural communities? Many rural communities look at the other ones, and they see jobs are generated, etc., and the economy is improving, and they assume it is the right choice for them. I think in many cases it would be the wrong choice, because tourism would cause a lot of conflicts in rural communities. They have a deeply rooted culture in its simplistic way, and they have a beautiful nature. These are the two supplies that they have, and tourism could challenge both of them, taxing the nature quickly, and as well as taxing or polluting the culture and causing a lot of problems, including family problem and so on and so forth, that the community did not have before tourism. We did talk about a lot of pros and cons of tourism, but the cons did not receive enough attention, and especially that rural communities have very simple, traditional, rooted culture, unchanged for many generations. It's very different from urban areas, that everybody has immigrated to urban areas. They have different backgrounds. They are not rooted there as such, and tourism can blend and spread into the urban community. Not so in the village tourism and agritourism and farm tourism, because we are talking about a limited population with a deep culture. So these are the issues as an anthropologist I would like to have advanced in the discussion. And the goal is to find something for the host community that improves their well-being and happiness and satisfaction, rather than dealing with conflicts that continue to grow.
Thank you, Jafar. Yes, I think we all agree that we have to discuss and we have to continue this discussion. I would like to invite Professor Hongen and Professor Kai to continue developing the discussion that they architected today. Scott is the platform that wants to reach the voice of people who are in small communities, and we would like to hear from the experiences of success to be shared. Once again, thank you very much. If any word from our moderators or panelists remain, we might have 1 minute. Otherwise, I would like to thank everybody again. And we open the cameras now. Our participants can show their face, that we have a group photo. And
so my colleague.
Yes.
I think we can keep recruiting more doctoral people to work on rural tourism and poverty issues.
Okay, let me go to the gallery mode, and I see.
I saw another colleague, student, previous.
Yeah, people on walk, people on the ground. Thank you very much. So while I'm taking, or my colleagues are taking the photo, I would like to invite everybody to visit our video library, YouTube/Scott webinars. Please freely use and utilize the recording of all Scott webinars. Over 100 webinars are recorded in your hand for you and your students, or any researchers or even communities that are interested to learn from each other. And we are looking forward to see you in future Scott webinars. Thank you very much, and have a good evening or morning or rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.